Minimum brightness. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Maximum brightness.
The Aimpoint ACRO P2 is the second generation ACRO. I never got my hands on the first one. In fact, this is my first time behind an Aimpoint product. And I have to say, this Swedish-made enclosed pistol red dot sight is so far quite incredible. And it absolutely better be for the price. These things go for around 600 bucks. You might be able to find them on sale a little bit cheaper, maybe a little bit more expensive, but 600 bucks is about the going rate. But keep in mind, despite how much money that might seem for a lot of people, and in fact it is a lot of money, these are in fact made in Sweden, which is really nice.
Pew pew pew.
The 3.25 MOA dot I feel is the perfect size for the window size that we have here.
Pew pew pew.
The window is much smaller than comparison to some other enclosed pistol sights, which we're going to touch on in just a moment, but the dot always seems sharp and crisp, which you will see throughout the rest of this video. But real quick, let's see what comes inside the box.
Pew pew pew.
There is very little to talk about as far as what comes inside the box with this thing. In fact, the box itself is one of the most vanilla boxes I've ever gotten my hands on. If it didn't have a giant thing on top that said Aimpoint, you wouldn't realize that there was a $600 optic inside of this. However, I'm not upset about that because I'm kind of hoping that the money went into the optic as opposed to the box. Once you crack it open, the ACRO is on beautiful display inside. The top piece of foam is glued down so you don't lose it, and whatever other accessories comes in underneath the bottom layer foam. The owner's manual is very sparse. There's not a whole lot to talk about on this thing, and that's going to be a reoccurring theme with this red dot. Aimpoint really did go with the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. There is literally nothing to adjust other than your windage, elevation, and your brightness. There's no gimmicks. There's no potential things to fail other than just the emitter and the reticle staying where you want it. And I am perfectly fine with that. One really nice thing that Aimpoint puts in this box is this T2 mount. So if you want to run it on an existing mount as a standalone optic, you can do that right out of the box. Or if you have another mount with another optic in it, you could run this as an offset, which is really slick. The last tool that's included in the box is the adjuster for your windage and elevation, and I believe the opener for the battery compartment, which is the side wings. But there's a problem with that if that's the case because, I ran into a bit of an issue. As far as the overall fit, finish, and qualitative feel, this thing is incredibly high scoring. It feels utterly bomb-proof, and it feels that way with the weight as well. Just over 2 ounces is on the heavier side. To compare it, a Holosun EPS of a similar size is, about a ½ ounce lighter or more. Now, with the battery compartment, I couldn't use the red tool to unscrew it. I had to use a regular screwdriver to do so. Once you crack open the battery compartment, you see a standard CR2032 battery with a lot of nice little fingers and 2 very positive pressure pushing, wow, lots of P's, pads on the bottom. Oh, an extra P on that one. Showcasing what I meant earlier with this battery compartment not being able to be opened too efficiently with this tool. It's rounded on the tool, whereas the pocket is square and flat, and it just seems to pop right out. As far as the buttons, they have a good feel. There's plenty of feedback, but they are very small. I do wish that they could have a button on either side, but Trijicon still has the patent on that, and if someone tries to copy what Trijicon does, they will get sued for it. Ask Holosun how that worked out for them. At least the buttons are very intuitive to use because the positive is higher and the negative is lower. Fortunately, my son wasn't screaming in the background long enough for me to get decent audio about how the detents on the windage and elevation sound and feel on this thing. And they do sound and feel very, very good. Literally the best of the best as far as what I've got my hands on. As far as what those 2 pins are for on the back of the tool, I really am not too sure, but you could dingle around with that as you so please. The claw on the bottom on this is very small. It makes me wonder if it's big enough, but if Aimpoint says it's good enough, I'm going to just have to take their word on it. I haven't really heard any problems with this thing breaking. But as far as how difficult this thing is to mount up, it's very easy. You loosen up the claw, slide it on, lock up the claw, and you are done. I really appreciate Aimpoint throwing in that adapter plate for the T2 mount in the box. I'm also very happy to see that a lot of pistol manufacturers are milling their slides to accept the ACRO footprint as a basic standard for this style of optic, because it so far seems to be pretty good. In fact, Lead and Steel is using this ACRO footprint for their Pandora, or their enclosed pistol sight, coming out very soon. We'll be very excited to see how that thing fares, especially now that I got my hands on the ACRO. And for anyone wondering, yes, you can see the emitter from the front, but it's basically a non-issue. Now let's get behind this thing a little bit more. Everyone is going to be different. For some, they're going to look at this and go, that window is way too small, the body's way too big. And I will agree, both of those are absolutely true, especially when you compare this thing to other closed emitter red dots. Again, however, Aimpoint probably made this to be as tough and as durable as possible, so they probably opted for a smaller window and a larger body around it to really make it that much stronger. This way you can drop this thing out of a helicopter and it'd probably be fine. As for the current view that we have of this thing, it's exactly 18 inches away from the rear lens to the camera, or where it would be for me from my eye to where it is on my pistol. You might have longer arms or shorter arms, so this is just a rough idea of what the actual proportions are going to look like for you when they're on a pistol. I cropped the image so this way we have a much better view of the glass itself and the reticle and its illumination. All the way down, it is completely invisible. However, bringing it up, the daytime brightness settings on this thing really are daytime bright, and its maximum brightness, even though it's a fairly clear sunny day, is ridiculously bright. This is very easily one of the brightest red dots I've ever gotten my hands on, and Aimpoint is known for having pretty bright illumination, so at least they seem to be holding true to their form. As far as the distortion on this thing, it is extremely minimal. The same thing goes for tint. As I pass across the power lines, you can see there's very little distortion and warping going onto the lines through the scope as opposed to on either side of it. And when we pan across the telephone pole, you'll see there might not even be anything there. However, this thing does have a large enough body that at 30 yards, it can obscure a telephone pole on either side posts. So, yes, this thing has a very thick body. I moved the ACRO back exactly 12 inches, so now the lens is 6 inches away from the camera, or roughly where it would be if it was on a carbine. That big black body off to the side is a magnifier, so we're going to see how well this thing gets magnified in just a moment. But when the optic is closer to your eye, you do notice that there's a little bit of fisheyeing going on. But again, it's so minimal, you really have to be looking for it, as opposed to something like, let's say, an RMR, which has guaranteed blue tint fisheyeing. In fact, let's roll in some of that beautiful bean footage, shall we? This RMR was filmed at the exact same time as the ACRO, but I'm not going to do a side-by-side comparison between these two because they are not the same style of optic. Obviously, the P2 is enclosed and the RMRs are open, and I don't think Trigicon's planning on making a closed emitter optic anytime soon. These are both at the same eye relief of 6 inches, and you can very clearly see that the glass through the RMR is nowhere near as nice. And guess what? The farther away it is, let's say like if it's mounted on a pistol, the worse it gets. I know people really say, oh, well, it's part of the design, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't have to be. Trigicon just refuses to change their methodology because it might interfere with some contracts, and they don't care about the civilian market as much as they do with the military one. So I understand that. But looking at this and then looking back at the P2, there's a clear winner here. And speaking of the P2, let's magnify this thing to see if the glass works well if you were to magnify it. Now, would you ever plan on magnifying a P2? You never know, there might be a single person on the entire planet that plans on putting an ACRO P2 as their main weapon sight and then putting a magnifier behind it for longer shots. There might just be someone. And if that person just so happens to do it, when you put it behind a Holosun HM3X like you see here, you can see that the ACRO produces an incredible looking image. There really is no distortion to speak of whatsoever. Everything is sharp, clear, crisp, as well as that dot. Look at how crispy that dot is. It's like a ginger snap cookie. Just click. Ah, it's beautiful. As far as the overall side-to-side eye relief and our parallax, as far as both the magnifier and the red dot, nothing really shifts around even at 400 yards. So if you do, again, plan on running this thing with a magnifier behind it, you're in for a real treat, let me tell you. But see, seriously, I'm never going to run a magnifier behind this. I'm going to run it as an offset, and I really would like to know if the parallax is going to shift the dot on target at all. Well, with the dot as close to that little vent as possible, I shift the camera around all sorts of ways. And as you can very clearly see, there's almost no shift whatsoever. It's almost like when you spend a lot of money on something that's supposedly well made, that every once in a while you get lucky and it actually is as good as the cost is of it. Yeah, I think that makes sense. There's no shift to this thing whatsoever. Parallax is basically non-existent. This is a red dot for a pistol at 400 yards and you can't notice anything. Ah, fantastic. Rounding out the Parallax segment of this video, let's get it out in front of us and look at it through very oblique angles. Now, you might have to do this at some point in time, or if you're not 100% perfectly behind it, does the image shift? Very, very minimal. But again, this has lenses on both the front and the rear. The emitter here is on full, and that 3¼ MOA dot seems a lot larger than 3¼ MOA. It's much more like 4 to 5, which for me is a beautiful size. However, once you bring down the illumination a little bit, it does shrink and tighten up quite a bit. Regardless, that dot is perfectly round. It's time, ladies and gentlemen, for a comparison. And it's the only true comparison I can make because this is the only other true enclosed pistol red dot sight that I've got my hands on, with the exception of the 509, but that's the 509 non-X. There's the X2 that replaced that, and that's still not as good as I hear from the EPS. So I'm going to take it for what it's worth and focus my attention on this. Now you might be asking, why am I comparing a $600 optic on the left versus a $4¼ or $4.50 optic on the right? Well, it's actually a bigger spread than that. You see, that is 4.5 roughly for the EPS with the dot and circle reticle like you see here, and a solar panel. If you buy a standard EPS with a regular dot and no solar panel, that price drops by at least $100. So I'm comparing technically this Acro P2 versus an optic that costs about half the price. For many of you, that might be blasphemy. You might be throwing stuff at your screen right now going, nothing can beat the P2. And I want to agree with you. Because again, the P2 is designed by Aimpoint, which is known for making pretty robust, durable stuff. They are 100% made in Sweden. In fact, all of the Aimpoint lineups from all of the optics that they make are made in Sweden. And well, they've withstood the test of time for a very long time. And nothing has really led me to believe that the Acro will fail under normal wear and tear. Maybe if you took it and threw it at a concrete wall as hard as you can repeatedly, yeah, you might damage it a little bit, but I guarantee you there'd be less damage on the Acro versus the EPS if you were to do the exact same torture test side by side. Unfortunately, I'm not baller enough or rich enough to be able to afford all these scopes to then destroy for your pleasure and for my pleasure as well, so we're all just going to have to deal with blue balls on this one. Touching real quick on how these two look side by side, these are again at the same sort of eye relief, roughly 6 inches to one another. The Aimpoint definitely has a clearer, less tinted, much less distorted view on it as opposed to the EPS, which has a very significant amount of blue tinting. Now, I did get a green illuminated EPS that is non-solar powered, and let me tell you something, the glass is much less tinted than what the red one is. So that's going to be a video all unto itself. As far as how these two compare side by side, there's a lot more differences than there are similarities, especially once you start magnifying it. They both have surprisingly good images, but the Acro is so true to life. There is nothing about it that screams, look at me. It's just the dot and the surrounding environment, and it really makes the overall experience of using it that much more pleasurable. The EPS does do a good job by itself, but when you put it side by side with something like the Acro, there's almost no competition. Now again, if you can't afford the Acro, is the EPS a much more obtainable option? Of course, especially if you're looking for something that is truly enclosed until Lead and Steel comes out with their Pandora, which I'm really excited for. But for right now, I don't have my hands on one, nor does anybody else, because they haven't been produced fully yet. So take this for what it's worth, ladies and gentlemen. As far as if you're on the fence between, let's say, the Acro and the EPS, it really comes down to your budget. I would much rather have a simpler option as opposed to a more complicated one. So it would be a literal difference of double the price for an Acro versus a standard EPS that doesn't have solar charging or the fancy reticle. That is a lot. But if you want the best of the best as far as the closed emitter pistol sights, the Acro is probably it. The Steiner MPS, I've heard good things, but not as many good things as I heard with Acros. As far as night vision capabilities, unfortunately, I got my night vision after I had finished filming for the Acro, so I wasn't able to truly see it for myself. But I do have some subscribers that do have night vision and Acros, and they have sent me small clips, which unfortunately I can't upload here because I don't have the raw data for it. But the body and the image literally just fades away. You have this beautiful, perfect floating dot in the middle of the sky, and the glass does not change anything as far as brightness settings go, as far as contrast goes, as far as nothing. It's literally just a floating dot. And that is absolutely the best performance I have seen for an enclosed pistol sight under night vision. I didn't do as much shooting with this as I would like. I did run a couple of carbine classes with it only because I didn't have the mount for my pistol, which I'm actually really upset about. I would have loved to run this on one of my pistols. So guess what? I am buying a Acro mount for my P10C, which when I do get a Pandora, which will hopefully be sooner rather than later, I will have something to truly push that on. And hopefully I'll be able to find a decent enough deal on an Acro P2 in the future to get my hands on one again, because that's how much I liked it. It was very simple. It was very rudimentary. It was made in Sweden. It seemed very tough and robust, and that is exactly what I enjoy. My last talking point on this before I sign off is the view through it is very small, and the body on it is very large. However, I was expecting to not like it because of that. But truth be told, even running it on a carbine, you're supposed to be shooting with both eyes open anyway. And if it's on a pistol, it'd probably be even better. Yes, I do prefer a larger window through it, but given this thing's track record and how durable and tough it is, I'm willing to give up a little bit of that view through it for everything else. I really do wish that they'd come out with a P3 that has a larger window, but again, the lead and steel Pandora is going to have a 30% larger view through it, so I'm really hopeful that thing takes off and is even half as good as this, because this thing is really that good. I can absolutely see myself owning one of these in the future, and I think it's going to have to happen, because it's so far right now the benchmark as far as clarity, view, just build quality. Everything about it is basically perfect. So if you're on the fence for one of these, as long as you can afford it, get it. If you can't, or you're not 100% sure on spending that much money on a single item, you can get a standard EPS that doesn't have a solar panel. You can get it with a 2 MOA dot or a 6 MOA dot, and it'll be a lot less expensive and serve the role more or less the same. There are a lot of other options out there, but I cannot personally vouch for that, so I'm not going to make a recommendation based on someone else's hypothesis on it. So with that, a huge thank you for all of you for watching. It's because of you guys that I am still making this content, because without any views and any support, I would much rather be spending time with my family. So thank you all very much for watching. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.